Richa, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Hi, Ashu. Pleasure meeting you. It's been an amazing summers here in Bangalore.
We're finally doing this, right? I think this one
Yes.
has long been in the making, right? And we're finally doing this. I'm very happy to have
Yes.
you. I'm usually excited about my conversations, largely because I get to discuss a lot of nuances and narratives, right, from a founder side. And I
Yeah.
think India is a complex market where the learning can be just so much more interesting, right? In your case, it's particularly exciting and very very interesting because you're essentially with Campus Fund, you're essentially empowering these students in college, right? It becomes very interesting, right? Especially in a 2020 and a post 2020 kind of an environment, right? Because
Yep.
with students in college, right? And I think anybody under the age of 25 and the world beyond have become two halves, right? We've become elephants in many ways,
True.
right? The consumption
Completely.
appetites are going to be very different, right?
Yep.
The creativity for this newer generation, the new economy is going to actually come from campuses, right? And I think all of that sort of in perspective, right? I think this becomes a very interesting conversation at that in that sense,
Yes.
right? But before
Yes.
we do that, right, I'd love you to give us a quick round of introduction to yourself,
Sure.
and
Sure.
we take it forward from there.
Sure, sure. No, no, it's such a pleasure to actually be finally doing this with you. So thank you for having, us as Campus Fund here talk to you. Really grateful to you for that. So, and I think the story of Campus Fund ties in very well to my personal story
Right.
because I've been a student entrepreneur myself.
Interesting.
I did my first startup back in 2009 when I was in my final year
Wow.
of engineering, right? So it's probably something which has been there, and I want
Right.
to sort of support the student ecosystem because there's so much happening, right?
Right.
So I did my first startup from 2009 to 2013. It was in the renewable energy space. We worked with Royal Bank of Scotland Foundation, Mahindra,
Right.
so on and so forth. And then eventually we sort of exited that business. And then we sort of started, a technology platform which helps enterprises measure and manage the impact of their sustainability,
Right.
CSR, and volunteering initiatives. So
Interesting.
that's called as Goodera. And we raised some 3 rounds of venture capital, Series B, and expanded
Interesting.
in the Indian market, American market, European market, and things like that. And in India, there's this CSR law which also came into play, right? So that
Right.
sort of acted as a catalyst for our growth. So that company is growing at its own pace, doing well. My
Wonderful.
co-founder is running it, but I wanted to do something more out of myself. So
Right.
I decided to move out. And in 2019 I did a transition. And what best to do while taking a break is to go back to school. So that's when I
And
landed.
and start a fund.
Oh, that happened. I'm saying
Right.
that was destiny actually. So I landed in London. I joined the London Business School, full-time MBA program. People were asking me, why do you need to do an MBA? I said, the real motivation is not to do an MBA. The real
Right.
motivation is to have a base in London and backpack in Europe. That's the motivation. Nothing
Interesting.
else.
Right.
So while there, I sort of started looking at different concepts, different ideas.
Right.
So I came across two concepts which I sort of pursued, or got more exposure to. One is called as search fund. Search yani dhoondna. So search
Right.
fund. It's a model which was started in Stanford in 1980s. It's also
Right.
called as entrepreneurship through acquisition. So that's one
Interesting.
thing that I got to understand in greater detail. And
Right.
then obviously I came across this whole dorm room fund model, right?
Right.
So I could relate to it, just like that. So dorm room fund as
Interesting.
a concept was started in the US in 2012,
Right.
which is about supporting student entrepreneurs in the American schools.
Right.
And there's an equivalent of dorm room fund for the UK European region called as the Creator Fund, right?
Interesting.
So they were just starting off in 2019, and I got an opportunity to be a part of the team while
Right.
actually, studying at LBS. And we used to look at startups from Cambridge, Oxford, UCL, Edinburgh, the whole region per
Right.
se. And this thought sort of started ticking in my mind that why isn't something like this in India, right?
Interesting.
And I could relate to it because I've been a student entrepreneur myself through and through, right? I've never worked in a corporate, so that's my
Right.
reality. So I was like, imagine if something like this existed, what can Indian students do?
Right.
And that's what, the seeds of, Campus Fund came from.
Interesting.
And then I, in full lockdown, it was in July 2020, I launched the first fund of Campus Fund, right?
Right.
I reached out to, friends and well-wishers in the
Interesting.
ecosystem, my angels, my friends, supporters,
Right.
telling them that I want to do something like this. Can you help me with some capital, right?
Right.
And that's how, Campus Fund was
Wow.
born, completely remote. And, now here we are, it's been 1.5 years and it's
Right.
just been an amazing journey. That's
I can
the story
imagine.
basically.
I can imagine, right? And we've been, we've had the opportunity of speaking with a couple of your portfolio startups, right? And I think one thing which is a constant, right, is the enthusiasm which is very visible in you and which is very visible in the portfolio companies. And my sense is, I think that becomes a parameter of assessment as well in the
Yeah.
larger scheme of things, Richa. But
Yes.
Richa, moving into understanding more about the Campus Fund, right? I think a
Sure.
fantastic journey, right? I think a very honest and a pious cause, right? And I
Yes.
think more and more capital is really the requirement of the day, right? And I think
Yes.
where we are as an economy, right? Of course, there are many views, but it's a challenging environment, right? And I think
Yes.
unless we have the capital available, you're not going to have entrepreneurs coming out, right? I think, and I think as a market, we're getting institutionalized very fast, right? Which essentially
Yes.
means the markets are not going to be easy, right? So more and more capital is going to be required, right? In that
Yeah.
case, right? I have many questions, right? But before we
Sure.
do that,
Sure.
I would love to know the construct of Campus Fund, right? So, are you an AIF category one fund? What's the AUM right now? What are the check sizes? What are some of the companies that you've invested in? Would love to understand all of that.
Right. So actually, I'd like to take a step back and actually explain you the Campus Fund model, right? Because it's slightly different from the conventional venture capital model,
Okay.
right? And,
Right.
being an entrepreneur, it's important that we bring in innovation in whatever we do, right? So,
Right.
doing that innovation through Campus Fund, but
Right.
also it's inspired by what the Dorm Room Fund and Creator Funds of the world do, right?
Right.
So basically, the beauty of this model is that as a GP, as a fund manager, we extend our ears and eyes across campuses by
Right.
onboarding the best of the talent in the country to be part of our team, right?
Interesting.
When I say part of our team, they are basically the people who look out for student entrepreneurs, right? So, I have a 30-member strong team of students from Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Calcutta, ISB, Flame, Ashoka, BITS Pilani, ID Bombay, ID Delhi, ID Madras, Indian Institute of Science. So they form a team, right? And they go through a rigorous training process, right?
Okay.
It's like boot camp into venture capital, and obviously it happens with them every month, because we call in experts and senior VCs in the industry to speak to them and things like that. So basically they, reach out in their network across the depth and the breadth of the country, right? They reach out to their undergrad schools, their friends of friends and things like that. And they scout for student entrepreneurs. So just to give you some statistics, in the last 1.5 years, we've evaluated 1,600 startups.
My God.
Right.
And that's not an easy number.
Yes. I mean, and that's the power of this, structure, and they basically actually not only scout, they also evaluate the deals, right? So before it comes to me and the central team, there is an evaluation process, right? Everything is sort of, structured that this is how you need to go about the process. It's a 5-step process. And then they also have a seat in the decision making. The beauty of this model is that these students get a voting right in the investment committee. That's the beauty. Yes. And then, we decide whether to invest in a startup or not. And, top of the funnel to the investment committee, as I said, it's a 5-step process. Every step is an elimination round. But if we decide to invest in a startup, it's like 45 to 60 days from the top of the funnel to cash in the bank, right?
Interesting.
So we move that fast. So that's the beauty of the model. Now, we are an AIF category 2 fund. So we are registered with SEBI. So which is which was a great learning in itself, amazing journey.
Right.
But yes, so that's the beauty of this model, right? So in a
Right.
way, it's for the students, by the students. As a fund manager, I'm just an enabler, is what I'd like to say.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, and it's you're possibly cultivating a very sensible culture, right? I think across campuses, because in campuses, a very large part of students are essentially disoriented, right? I think tier one is still very clear in terms of what they need to do. I think confusion still persists, right? I think especially engineering colleges, once you kind of crack through, I think you're essentially in a quandary, right? Of what to do, what not to do. There's just so much of commotion around you. I think you're also sort of figuring out yourself in the process. You possibly, a lot of these students are out of houses for the first time around, right?
Yes.
I think they're trying to just, like I said, right, figure themselves out in the process. And I think bringing something so sensible, right, which helps them understand, diversity, impact, growth, consumers, engagement, and so many more nuances, right? I think just so phenomenal. I think this is that parallel learning which is so much more required on campuses, right? And I think that's a great impact that you're kind of making, right? I mean, end result, whatever that is, I'm sure as a GP, as a fund, of course, you have those pressures, but I think just from an impact standpoint, this is just so much more phenomenal, right? To hear about it is so overwhelming at many levels, right? I can go back to my colleges and think, the challenges that, for example, we came across, right?
Yes.
I've been very active in some of these IITs, right? And you come across these students, right? And who are trying to sort of figure their journey, their path, right? It becomes so difficult. Right?
Yes.
Richa,
Yes.
Some of the other questions, right? Now, when you, and this is more on the fund side of things, right? Now, when you're a fund, right? Of course, like I said, you clearly have a responsibility towards your LPs.
Yes.
If you look at the Indian venture capital ecosystem, right? We've continued to celebrate a lot of college students, right? I mean, look at Ritesh, for example, and pretty much all of the guys, right? They essentially came out of college just about a few years experience, or straight out of college, and they kind of raised the kind of funding that they did, right? Now, I understand where you're coming from, right? But the capital has always been available for students coming out of colleges, right? And that's largely because they're challengers. They don't necessarily come with preconceived notions. They have the energy to build for a market like India, right? Which is just so much more important in many ways, right?
Yeah.
While I understand there's a differentiation that you're doing, right? There are many of these others that are already there. I mean, look at companies like FamPay, right? Who actually gone on to raise money from Elevation, all of these guys out there, right? They were straight out of college. I think possibly still in college, right? And there are some amazing such companies, Detect Technologies, for example, Bharat Innovation Fund invested, then they were still in college, right? There have been a lot of those instances, right? So how do you, for example, does that leave you with very good options? Because then, of course, there are these larger marquee funds which are also eyeing that as a space. What's the pull here, right? Is this the community, or you essentially, the role is very clear that you kind of step in much earlier, help them figure, and then this becomes an asset which others and more mature funds would look at, right? What's the construct? Where are you on that requirement front?
Sure. This is a brilliant question, and thanks for actually asking that. So see, the thing is that, in this ecosystem and the place that we are playing in, it's all about collaboration. It's not competition. So I'm not competing with the larger funds. We are in fact collaborating, right? The second thing is that, the construct of the larger funds is such that, they may just, look at the high resource campuses, say the IITs, BITS, VITs of the world, but it'll be very difficult for them to go down into, the university ecosystem which exists in India. The university ecosystem in India is beyond, there's a huge ecosystem beyond the IITs and BITS, right?
Correct.
So our objective is, as Campus Fund, is to, provide that platform to students, irrespective of the institute that they are coming from, irrespective that the degree that they are pursuing, right? So entrepreneurship is just not, restricted to students of a certain set of schools, right? That's the, intention with which we are building. And I'm very, very happy to say that, out of our 10 portfolio companies that we have currently, right, 60% of our portfolio companies are from medium resource or low resource campuses. Only 40% are from the high resource institute like the IITs and BITS, right? That's one thing. Second, 44% of our co-founders are non-tech founders, right?
Oh, that is amazing.
Yes, and 33% of our co-founders are female, right?
Lovely.
So these are some interesting statistics. So as I said, we want to go deep into the university ecosystem. And Ashu, one thing that we've realized is
Right.
the students in the medium low resource colleges are so much more resilient, so
I agree.
much more, they are so much more focused, and because they know that they have to sort
They
of
want an
work hard.
opportunity.
Yes, they are much more hungry, right? And that's
Yeah.
what you need, right? So they're
Absolutely.
resilient. But obviously there are some advantages, disadvantages, and we want to keep our portfolio balanced and healthy,
Right.
because
Right.
in the end we are also a fund. We are not doing a
Right.
charity. We are also responsible towards
Absolutely.
our LP, but it's a healthy mix. And I'd
Right.
like to say that some of our portfolio companies, obviously I can't disclose the details at this point in time. Maybe 2 months down the
Sure.
line I'll actually have more to share. But in fact, in our portfolio, a couple of companies are doing their third round after our investment. So we get
That's
in at the
amazing.
pre-seed stage. There are folks who are doing seed and series A, and it's a healthy mix of students from both high resource and medium resource institutes. So
Amazing.
what I'd say is students
Right.
from high resource institutes already have the network and the platform. If you give them more support, they'll be able to do wonders. In
Sure.
medium resource, low resource, if you give them that platform, they will also do wonders, right?
Interesting.
So it's just about bringing them to the same level playing field,
Very
and
interesting.
they'll do amazing, right? So it's in the end the founders, how passionate about how passionate they are about what they are building, and that's
Right.
it. Doesn't matter, your degree and everything will then take a back seat. So that's the thesis
Interesting.
on which we are operating. So we
Super.
compete and we don't compete, we collaborate with
I think
all these funds.
I think which is a standard. I think pretty much everybody out there in the ecosystem, right? I think,
And we actually
investing is
come
about
in
collaborating.
one step earlier, right?
I can
So
understand. Right.
so we act
You're
as a
actually cutting the
good
risk for
feeder
them.
fund. Yeah, we actually act as a good
Right.
feeder fund. So when I can disclose more in the future, you'll get to know that a lot of these guys have actually come in into our startups after we've invested, which is
I
amazing,
can
and which is
imagine.
also a validation, right?
Which is a validation. I think which is also very normal, right? Because I think you're really sort of cutting the risk at a very different level, right?
Yeah.
I think you prepare a lot of these guys to handle more serious money with a lot of maturity, and I think that's a very, very important I think capability and capacity building, right? Which is required for I think a lot of these funds, right? Now, Rishabh, coming to now talking of campus fund, right? Now there are two perspectives to it, right? One is I have had the opportunity of going to many of these campuses and looking at students and talking to students, right? And one big handicap that sort of comes into the process and becomes a big sort of a problem area is that these are students who are essentially just coming out of homes, right? And those are very comfortable environments, right? Not in a wrong way. I think Indian society is such, right, where students get that kind of comfort, right? Parents take care of them very well, right? In most likely, right? In larger number of households, right? Now the thing is that on a lot of occasions, right, these guys are, when they come up, right? So while there's energy, there's enthusiasm, right? There's this willingness to sort of go out and build something large, right? Aspiration, all of that, right? On a lot of occasions, exposure becomes a very big impediment, right? They don't necessarily understand a lot of challenges, right? Now I ask you this question because as an economy that we are, right, we're not a homogeneous place. Right, we operate in many pockets, right? There are a lot of regionalities, there are a lot of cultural aspects that have to be addressed, looked at, right? When you're productizing all this, a lot of mature founders, for example, and we're seeing this in fintech, right, are not necessarily able to crack it. Who've had that. Now, what happens in an environment like that? I mean, the quality of a set is like the paramount is of paramount importance, right? What happens in a case like this? While I understand there's this mechanics that you built, right, which helps you identify greater sets, all of that, right? But we still are an ecosystem. These students are largely coming out of an ecosystem which is very conducive, very comfortable, right? The exposure required to crack into a market like India and create that large enterprise is just so limited. Is that? Do you have fun doing what you're doing, or it gets frustrating at a certain level, saying that, listen, what are we getting right? What are this? In a sense of realization that and I've been through that, right? The 10th founder that you meet and you're like, listen, what am I spending my time on, right? Not that you mean anything bad for them. It's just that you're looking for a more serious player, right? Because investing
Sure.
is that, right? It's a race
Yes.
in certain
Yes.
cases, right? You
Yes.
have to deliver
Yes.
returns to your LPs, right? What's your
Yes.
sense of that? I'd love to understand that.
Yes. No, again, a brilliant and a bang on question, and I'd say things are changing for good, right?
Right.
So, because COVID was, obviously not something that we wanted, but it
Sure.
has pushed digitization to the next level, right?
Right.
And it has sort of, reduced the barrier or
Right.
removed the barrier rather with regards to access to knowledge, right? Um, Even if you're a student in some tier 3 city,
Sure.
just having data, access to data, thanks
Right.
to companies in India who've made data that cheap, right?
Right.
It's great,
Please.
students are able to access information, they can do
Right.
courses of any university in the world, right? There is so much happening on YouTube
Sure.
and things like that. If you really want to learn something, it's not that there is information arbitrage that used to exist in earlier days,
Absolutely.
right? That
Right.
has completely gone, right? So you will see more and more students, and that's what our job is as a fund, to
Sure.
find those rock stars, irrespective, right? Either the students would have done a self study, to understand the ecosystem in which they are trying to build their startup through
Right.
whatever is available is online, right? Second, they a lot, this culture is changing, right?
Sure.
Initially, when we were sort of in college, we were like, okay, parents will fund us, we will have a summer
Right.
internship, that is structured and everything. But you'll see a lot of students are now hustling to take
Right.
up internships, while they are studying. And there are many platforms which
Right.
have come in which actually provide internships to students while they are studying. So it's one,
Sure.
curriculum mandated internship, but
Right.
throughout the year also, right? So a lot of students are moving to experiential learning themselves, right?
Right.
And the national education policy sort of encourages that. It will
Right.
come into effect, in the next, like a lot of changes will happen in the
Yes.
education system, but things have started moving. So the
Right.
curriculum and everything provides for, options for students to get exposure while they are studying, either
Right.
through self learning or through these internships and things like that, right?
Right.
So, and these are typically the students you'll see who will basically start startups, right?
Right.
So they are becoming more and more self-aware, right?
Interesting.
And with the startup ecosystem seeing the kind of boom that is coming in India,
Right.
and what they read and stuff, people are, students are so much more encouraged.
Right.
Also, they are getting more and more acceptance from their
Sure.
social setup.
Right.
Parents are now understanding what a startup means. They are not like, you have to get a job,
Right.
and with, like whatever be it, Shark Tank and such things have done a
I was just about to say
service.
that.
Yes, wherein they've educated a lot of the, senior ecosystem
Right.
in India
I
that,
agree.
something like this is viable. So things
Right.
are changing. And these are the kind of founders that I scout for, right? So as
Sure.
I said, there are 1,600 startups that came to the top of the funnel, of which
Right.
we've invested in 10, right? So it's an interesting journey, right?
Right.
And so things are changing, and you have to find those gems, irrespective
And
in
buzz.
which part of the
Right.
country they are. Yeah.
No, I think Richa, that's a very interesting point that you kind of made, right? I think while I agree with a lot of what you said, right, but that's still a very small percentage, right? I think
Yeah.
What has essentially happened is I don't know, and this is an observation that I had, right? I come from a tier 2 city. I've had an upbringing in tier 2 city, right? I think the parental expectations and the aspirations continue to be pretty much the same, right? And I think as a parent today, I want a comfortable life for my kid, right?
Yeah.
And I think job becomes a good sort of alibi. One thing that I'm starting to actually see in students, right? Well, of course, a lot of this is happening. They're actually going on for internships and stuff like that, right? And pardon me for saying this, right? A reasonable percentage of all of this is still very cosmetic, right?
Yes.
A lot of people are essentially doing it to build their resumes,
Yes.
right?
I agree.
And you know what I mean, right? Now, this is not very, very impactful, right? It scares me,
Yeah.
right? Because, to me, that becomes a reflection of, are we as an economy becoming very lackadaisical, right? Are we becoming more fringe? Are we becoming more cosmetic, right? Are we becoming more
Yeah.
tangential, right? Are we losing that
Yeah.
depth? I think those are some very, very important concepts. But I think I'll
Yes.
save that for the next discussion that we have, right?
Yes.
I think that is part of
No, but
interesting
I
side.
agree to your point that, I agree, and when we are evaluating startups, right, we
Right,
also have to pick up those softer aspects, heuristics,
right,
as you say, right?
right.
Because a lot of founders may just be doing this because if you do a startup, right, you can crack a
For
good
doing a
B
great
school.
MS.
Yes, you can you can do a great masters, or you can get acquired, or you can actually get jobs in good companies because people see, ha, ye founder hai, this guy is a founder, so probably he's a
Yeah,
hustler sort of thing. So you
right,
need to be very careful while evaluating this. But yes, I would say that things are very positive, though the number is less now. It's increasing by leaps and bounds, and
I
and
agree.
it's going to change, so in a larger ecosystem, when something is building, you will definitely have some not so great things, but there will be
Right.
much more greater things that you can
You know,
see.
I think one thing which I think I am in love with, and I
Yeah.
think is just so critical for any economy, right? I think
Yeah.
our kids are becoming very honest, right?
Yes.
I think that integrity layer is just so phenomenal. I think you start to see that a lot of responsibility, and I think that's possibly because of education, and I think we're becoming a larger, very cosmopolitan, right? And I think
Yes.
information and knowledge is a very big role to sort of play as far as that is
Yes.
concerned, right? Risha,
Yes.
now there is another perspective to this, right? Well, of course, we
Sure.
can continue to sort of discuss,
Yeah.
the challenges and the good parts about being on
Yes.
campus, right?
Yes. Yes.
I think I'd love to discuss about COVID, right? And I think no conversation is really complete, right? Now, the way I look at it is that we are essentially as a country, becoming one large, very very large market, right? A large billion people market. In many ways, with all of this information that is available, right? I think tier two, tier three is going to essentially behave very similar to that of a tier one. The arbitrage that is just about a few days because you have a very fledgling D2C ecosystem that has come in. You have information systems like say social media has become just so much more relevant, right? From an information standpoint, you know what's happening, what's not happening, right? So the
Yeah.
awareness levels are very very high, right?
Correct.
Now, what happens in an economy like that, right? This becomes like that point for very different kind of innovation to take off, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, for example, say Facebook, right? So any connected economy, right? The innovation that happens is very, very different in nature, right? And it just becomes so much more difficult for a VC to go out and actually back that, right? Developed markets have seen that, right? So we've had the Twitters of the world, we've had the Facebooks of the world, right? Which are not necessarily very they were very new businesses, right? They were
Right.
not essentially businesses that were built to say, cater to a disconnected market or crevice that existed so that the transaction that was happening, the trade that was happening, right? They were
Sure.
completely new models that just came out of nowhere, right?
Right.
Now, campuses are going to essentially be that zone where a lot of such innovation is going to come from, right?
Correct. Correct.
In a market like this, which is a unique position for you, right? Because you're right there, you're at it, right? Um, but when we are a market like the one we are, right,
Right.
it just becomes so difficult. The noise is just so much. The
Sure.
dichotomy, like I said, is so much across
Yes.
all these pockets. It becomes very difficult to identify such innovations, right? So while
Sure.
you are at it, there could also be a possibility that you might just reject it, saying that listen, this might not work, right? Now, where your experience as a fund manager, becomes say, an impediment in the process, right? While of course you
Sure.
have a structure where these students
Sure.
have a certain say or not. Uh,
Sure.
but I'm saying, and in India, like I said, is a capital-starved country, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You'll always have that tough choice to make, right, between
Sure.
a model that could visibly do better or something which is just so bizarre, right, but could do exceptionally well, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
how difficult is that, right?
Sure.
To sort of choose between this madness and a
Yes.
possible
Yes.
play, right? Because, like I said, I mean, I couldn't have asked this question to anybody else in the investing ecosystem, right?
Yes.
Because you possibly and very deeply plugged into the campus ecosystem, right?
Sure.
So this becomes a very pertinent question, and only to you in that
Yes.
sense.
Yes.
I would love
No.
to hear your
No.
views.
No, definitely. It's like walking that tightrope, wherein you have to take decisions. So it's actually like that. But, you rightly pointed out, right? There is new innovation, right?
Right.
That's in terms of technology and things like that. And I'd say that there is another category which is targeting a new audience,
Right.
right? So, I'll just give you some numbers here, right?
Right.
So, what we've seen is like for example, a lot of e-commerce businesses are
Right.
being started up by students who are probably coming from tier 2, tier 3 cities, or
Right.
the medium resource, low resource institutes, right? Whereas AR VR kind of technologies are being built by students who are, in the high resource institutes.
Right.
We can sort of make it out, right? Why,
Sure.
AR, VR, or the latest
Right.
technologies are coming in from high resource institutes, right? So, there's this fine difference that you'll see in terms of the sectors in which innovation is happening, right? So,
Right.
one is with regards to the technology, and the second is with regards to the audience. So, when
Right.
I say the TG or the audience,
Mhm.
one is the urban market, which is sort of
Right.
flooded by startups, right?
Mhm.
But then there is a huge set of, startups which are coming in to service the needs
Right.
which are there in tier 2, tier 3 cities, right?
Mhm.
And that in itself is such a huge market,
Right.
right? Even if you look at the large established companies in this country like Flipkart, Amazon, the big banks, for
Right.
them the next million, 10 million customers are in Bharat, right?
Right.
So you need to sort of, when you're the fund manager, you need to see, sort of keep a fine balance in
Right.
terms of the new technologies that you're backing and in terms of the new markets that you're backing,
Right.
right? And that's how, we go about taking a call whether this startup is worth investing or not, or whether it
Sure.
is me too, there are already too many players. But
Right.
there's this lens with which you sort of have to sort of look at it, because there's so much that can, there's great opportunity in tier 2, tier 3 cities,
Right.
right? And these are some problems which probably folks staying in the urban markets won't even understand,
Right.
right? So there is something waiting there to be disrupted. At
Mhm.
the same time, there is, latest technology which is coming in, which is brain computer interface. You can control
Sure.
motion through, all of those
Right.
things, right? So there are both of these worlds. And as a fund manager, seeing these kind of innovation coming in from, campuses, you have to, keep a fine balance between the two.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, there is one more very critical aspect, right? And that is that when you think of students, right? Typically you come across businesses that are engagement first, right? And that's largely because students in India, especially, have not necessarily gotten into the commercial world, right? They're not necessarily very exposed to the commercial world, right? These
Yes.
are nuances that they're still to sort of pick up, understand, right? Challenges that of, say, somebody who's, say, 28 onwards, right, working for a bit, possibly getting into a family. I think students don't necessarily understand a lot of these things, right? And predominantly, like I said, a lot of these models are essentially all engagement-driven models. Uh, the biggest of all problems is that today, with, say, a certain sensibility that is coming, right? Engagement is an alternate currency, yes, right? But translation of that currency into a paying audience again has become very, very important, right? Now that
True.
is
True.
a massive dichotomy, right?
Right.
Because these are students who are not on the other side, right? Who are not on the consumer side, and understanding how he or she is going to prioritize, right? They want to hustle it out, which is not necessarily the right way all the time, right? I mean, you have to be very deft when it comes to, say, some of these nuances, right? What's your sense of it, right? I mean, when you, for example, when you are assessing these models, and this is in continuation with the earlier point that you kind of highlighted, right? How important does it become to assess engagement versus possibility to play, right?
Sure.
Or do you think a lot of these founders require a lot of handholding in the process, which also becomes, say, a very large part of the construct of relationship that you have with them,
True.
to get them to that point of sensitivity? And are they absorbent of that? I think that's also a very, very important part, right? Because when you're in a journey, it just becomes, it's difficult to communicate, right? You're in a
Sure.
certain zone, right?
Sure.
How does that get managed? Would
Sure.
really like to know that.
Again, a very pertinent question, Ashu. So again, I'll throw in some statistics because I have this data of 1,600 startups, so I can sort of help you understand this. So it was quite interesting for us to sort of realize
Sure.
that 60% of the startups in our funnel were B2C and
Right.
40% of the startups were B2B, right?
Interesting.
So we'd initially think that B2B is an insider's game, as you were mentioning that, you
Right.
need to have a corporate exposure to be able to build a B2B business and
Right.
things like that, right? But that's not the case. And in fact, 60% B2C top of the funnel, 40% B2B, right? But in our IC, the ratio reverses. 60% of the startups who go to the IC are actually B2B. We funded
Interesting.
more B2B startups than B2C
Right.
startups, right? So,
Interesting.
building B2B businesses is no more an insider's game. And
Right.
I'll tell you how students get this kind of an exposure, right? So the
Right.
internships that they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
They open them to a lot of, the gaps that exist. It can
Interesting.
be, a
Right.
lot of them are doing, internships in tech companies, coding things and
Right.
things like that. Some
Right.
of them are acting as campus ambassadors for large businesses, right? Who want to sort of promote their product in
Right.
campuses and things like that. So they've started getting that kind of an exposure, right? So
Right.
they are building to solve some of the problems that they have faced, right?
Interesting.
Or they see that their friends are also facing in different universities, right? So
Right.
you are sort of seeing that change.
Right.
Secondly, a lot of these companies, startups, are actually building for SMEs, right?
Right.
That's a new wave that has come in, right? So digitization of SMEs, or anything that has to do with SMEs, right? It's like, exploding. Everybody
Right.
is trying to do that. So
Uh-huh.
another interesting statistics that I'd like to share with you
Right.
is that in our top of the funnel, right,
Mm-hmm.
16% of the startups were edtech startups,
Right.
right? But less than 1% of them went to our investment committee, right?
Interesting.
So, students feel that I am a student, so I know how to build an edtech
Right.
company, right? That's the thesis with which they start.
I know
But
what you
then,
mean. Yeah.
yeah. So basically, you'll see. So it's not necessarily that, getting a corporate job
Right.
gives you insights, but they are actually getting that insights by say seeing their brothers and sisters or friends work. They getting exposure through internships and things like that, right? So it's a
Interesting.
healthy mix of B2C and B2B, which
Right.
is happening and which is sort of changing this whole paradigm.
Interesting.
So that's how we sort of evaluate and see which to back and which not to,
Right.
because a lot of these startups are innovating. Even in a
Right.
B2B angle, they come up with something which we think, oh, this is so simple but hasn't been done by someone
Right.
yet, right? So they see it. So one thing, when you look at a student led startup, the thing is that they are not biased because they've
Right.
not seen the world as you and I have seen it, right?
Right.
So they come up with such plain thoughts at times, and you feel that yes, this makes sense. Why couldn't we think about it? It's so
Right.
obvious, right?
Right.
So it's a completely fresh, unbiased approach, that
It's
they
a,
take to some of these problems. Yeah.
I hear you, right? But I think not a lot of people can fathom the kind of difficulty and the challenges that you go through, right? Because it's,
Yes.
looking at every single nuance and being so sharp. I think
Yes.
at every single occasion, being so aware, right? And being, just considering those permutation combinations possible is just so
Yes.
difficult, right?
Yes.
I don't know how
But
you
that's the
incentivize
fun.
yourself.
But that's the fun.
Well, I
That's the
understand, right? I
beauty. Yes.
I understand. I don't know how you kind of incentivize yourself extra, but I'm sure I think a lot of your LPs should contribute to that
Yes.
in some way, right? I think another point is that, right? Now, we've essentially, I think, e-commerce has been here for about a decade, right? We've seen, a lot of innovation that has happened, right? A lot of, for example, personalization that happened, right? So e-commerce, for example, become very, very intelligent, right? 2020 is kind of really fast track that entire the
Digitization
momentum,
piece.
right? The
Yeah.
digitization, the momentum, right? And I think just sitting at home, we could order something and we could return something. I think it's become like a natural sort of it's become a part of us, right?
Yes. Yes.
A tendency that could have possibly set in 2025 say on onwards, I think just happened to us. And how? And this is something which is, fairly, homogeneous across the country, right? I think people have got to really be comfortable. Of course, there are still some nuances that need to be taken care of, but we've largely established the infrastructure which was required, right?
Correct.
I think now one thing that I'm particularly excited about is the start of a product economy, right? Not that we were never, but I think, once you have this infrastructure that is established, right, you have transparency in say, transactions. Your purchase or return becomes so much more easier. Systems become efficient. It is like a perfect starting point, right? I have continued to wait for that point when we become a product economy. I think 2020 essentially is
Yes.
or 2021 has kind of brought us to that point, right? Now, what that means is that we're going to start to see a lot of innovation. D2C, for example, is one such area, right? Food is another such area. There is a lot of that which is now happening. Of course, there are certain people who are solving for many other issues in a deep tech, with building applications for deep tech and, the variety of other things, health tech and all that, right? But we're largely, consumer landscape is something which is like really, really exciting, right? For us to say achieve that 5 trillion mark or whatever, I think we cannot have like 100,000 entrepreneurs working on deep tech, right? We'll just have a few thousands, right? A large part of this is going to go on to make, product startups, right? Or in a B2C setting, right?
Sure.
What's your sense of it, right? And students is becoming a very, very large segment, right? Also, with parents that are giving them money, they're doing internships, right? They're earning with a variety of other things. There's a liquidity, right? They want to experiment. Fads are flying very, very fast in this community, right? What are some of the trends that you're seeing in that area? Right? My sense is tier 2 and tier 3 is really going to hop onto a lot of this, vis-a-vis say building deep tech applications and all of that, right? So a lot of product innovation is going to happen from these cities, because creativity is limitless, right? I mean, it can come out of wherever. Your exposures today with the information ecosystem that exists can come out of wherever, right? So your influence can come from wherever. What's your sense of it? What are you seeing? What are the trends there? I'd love to understand.
Sure. So I'll just probably take a step back and, you just briefly mentioned about the LP. So, I'm just so grateful that, I've got some of the biggest brands, be it in terms of institutions, be it in terms of individuals, right, who've come in to support Campus Fund, right? So that's been really, it's again, as I said, it's destiny, right? That these guys have come in to support. Probably I'll talk about them in the next session that we do. So, because the thing is, they also bring in that kind of expertise and support to our portfolio company, right? Be it with regards to GTM, be it with regards to, mentoring these, founders or helping them with specific issues that they have, right? Because a lot of these are institutions and, successful entrepreneurs, industry veterans and things like that. So I just wanted to say, very grateful that, they are coming to support us. Now, coming to the product economy, I agree. And Ashu, that's why I'm saying, this is the tipping point in the Indian ecosystem. And if you have to, build yourself for the student ecosystem, this is the time, to get in. So, very delighted to say that 33% of our portfolio companies are product first companies, right? So again, and it's all student entrepreneurs, so that makes me so proud, that students are, doing amazing stuff, from space tech to deciphering the brain to, mobility, whatnot, right? And, we happen to support them. See, the thing is that, I agree to your point that a lot of product-based startups are going to come in, be it deep tech or otherwise, right? The beauty is that, obviously you need a lot of money or significant amount of money to actually build prototypes and things like that, right? So what we have typically seen is that, and again, thanks to the government of India, that there are a lot of these grant schemes which have started, right? So a lot of these grant schemes, which come in up to 50 lakhs, that's good enough an amount to actually help them, build an MVP sort of a thing, right? Or a prototype, So if you see that what they are building makes sense with that grant money, we as Campus Fund come in and support them, right? So, but I'm saying that, government is doing its bit to promote product-based innovation, right? And they are making this capital available to the nooks and corners of this country. If you are a startup, student-led startup in tier 3 city of a country, you will still have access. So like, for example, I was part of a competition run by the Karnataka government, right? They give about 100 crores worth of grants across Karnataka to startups on a yearly basis, even more, right? And reaches the depths and corners of the state, right? I'm sure similar programs exist, in other states as well, right? I've seen Karnataka firsthand, right? And, I've seen, a couple of our, companies, startups in the funnel who've gotten grants, or probably from accelerators or innovators, which give them some equity free, capital and things like that. That is actually doing a great service to propel this product based economy. And I would urge more and more founders, because as VC money, it becomes difficult to, sort of
Do a lot of
support the
this.
very initial early stage of
Right.
prototyping, right? So this capital should be tapped into,
Mhm.
so that you get to a certain level and you are able to say that, this prototype sort of makes sense, and then,
Right.
campus fund can support, right?
Right.
But I'd say, this is a great service to the nation, that this
Right.
grant schemes across the country are doing to, propel towards a product based economy sort of a thing.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. I mean, I think I'm going to save some of that for our next discussion, right? Because,
Yeah.
I've had the opportunity of running a few of these schemes, designing a few of
Yes.
these schemes, and,
Yes.
looking at some of these schemes, right, across many states, even central government, right?
Yes.
I think the challenges that are very, very different, right? While
Yes.
there is possibly one state which could sort of move in a different way, I think for a
Yes.
lot of other states, the
Need to catch up.
bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Well, I think catch up. You'll be surprised, right? But
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
said, right, we're going to discuss some of that in our next conversation, right?
Sure.
It's not. It's
Sure.
not. It's not as easy, right?
I agree.
I think I'm at least of a point of view. While of course I understand where you're coming from, right, and I agree
Yeah.
to a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I at least continue to question this in my mind, saying that is this even required, right? For the
Correct.
inefficiency that exists in that ecosystem, right? Is
Yeah.
this even required, right? But like I said, right, we're going to save that for our
Yes.
next discussion.
Sure.
My sense is, I think a lot more money needs to come into the product way. And when I say product way, that essentially means D2C, new experiments, right? And I think that's like a new emerging sort of a market, right? Now,
Yes.
Risha,
Yes.
one more thing, right? That happens, right? Now, we spoke of exposure, we spoke of students, right? We spoke of the kind of businesses that they're doing. Now, typically, what is happening is that when you're looking at the movement of VC money, right, a large part of VC money is essentially moving into today slightly more mature founders, right? And because of the global liquidity condition, the money is moving in very, very fast, right? Which essentially means that the winners are getting established in the game much faster than we can even anticipate, right? Earlier, because of the inefficiencies of the market, it used to be a slightly slow process, right? Founders had to be at it, right? Which meant that there was still a window for newer players to sort of come in, right? Now, when you're looking at college students who are not necessarily, like I said, right? For me, exposure continues to become a very, very big issue, right?
Sure.
Because consumer behavior is kind of changing. Responsiveness is required is very different, right? Unless
Yeah.
you are in a completely engagement-driven model, right? Now, in an environment like that, when there are seasoned founders who are going on and raising the kind of capital that they are, it becomes a massive problem. Because your cost of acquisition in a connected environment goes up, right? And that's the reason we see very, very large valuations in developed markets, right? So, for example, US, we continue to question, why are they raising so much capital? And that's largely because your cost of acquisition continues to be very, very high in the process, right?
Correct.
For student startups, it becomes just so much of a problem, right? Because these are not, I mean, while of course you're bringing in this capital, right? You're possibly taking them to a certain point, right? A lot of them will die out in the process, right? And that's largely because the market nuances, and these are systemic issues, right? There's something that
Sure.
nothing that you can do about as an investor, and nothing
Sure.
that they can do
Sure.
about as an investor, right?
Sure.
Does that concerns you? I know there are no easy answers to this,
Yes.
but I'd love to understand how are you looking at it,
Sure.
at least as a fund manager, right? I'd love to
Sure.
understand your ways of
Sure. Sure.
prioritizing, answering, getting an answer to it.
Sure. Sure. So, as you and I understand, like VCs is a business of outliers, right?
Correct.
So, you are not looking at averages, you're looking at exceptions, right? I mean, that's the whole
Right.
model, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So, obviously there are challenges, senior,
Right.
second time, third time founders are raising the kind of capital that they are raising.
Right.
But if you are building a good business, right, like for example, as Campus Fund, as I said again, I'm very grateful that all
Right.
the bigger funds, be it the Lightspeed, Sequoia, Axel, K Capital, you speak about the VCs,
Right.
right? We sort of, they are very kind enough to actually have a close look on our portfolio companies,
Interesting.
right? So we are building a lot of this network that these guys become visible to the larger funds from day one, right?
Right.
The day we invest, they are made visible to a lot of these guys, right?
Right.
And if the business is solid, and if the business is hitting the numbers that it is supposed to hit,
Right.
right, the larger funds are not shying away from backing up these
Interesting.
entrepreneurs. So
Right.
I see that being a critical role of Campus Fund, that yes, second time, third time founders
Right.
by themselves, they will be raising money, right? Because everybody knows them in the ecosystem and things like that. I think
Right.
that's a critical role that Campus Fund is playing by actually bringing the spotlight to some of these superstar student entrepreneurs which exist,
Interesting.
right?
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
telling the bigger guys, hey, there's something very interesting for you to look at.
Right.
Probably it's not ready for you right now. 6 months, 12 months later, there will be something for you to definitely, support, right? So,
Very interesting.
trying to take some spotlight from them and bringing it to these student entrepreneurs. And that's what
Amazing.
I think is our job as Campus Fund. That's what's
Amazing.
critical for us. Yeah.
Amazing. Richa, it was the end of our conversation.
Yeah.
I have loved every bit of this conversation, right? I completely resonate with the cause, right? I think, and it's a very, very important cause. I think, especially when you're in an economy like the one we are, and we have some very, very strong fundamental issues. I think it's just become important that, somebody has to stick the neck out and kind of stand up for it, right?
Yes.
And I think capital availability on campus is just so much more important.
Yes.
I think you're not just sort of say supporting these founders, but you're also sort of, kind of evangelizing the entire, the concept of entrepreneurship. But, more importantly, what you're doing is you're creating very responsible citizens, right? That's very, very important, right? So I think when you are to be an innovation economy or an innovation focused economy, I think that sense of responsibility and sense of awareness is very important. And I think that's what you're doing, right? A very fundamental impact, which I think not a lot of people, even the larger guys in the game, are not necessarily doing, right? That in itself is a huge service. I would like you to, this being our last question in this conversation, right? How I actually want this conversation to go on, right? But, we're going to bring this one to a close. And we're going to save some of these interesting points, right, for our next conversation. But, I would love to, one, of course, what are the next 2 years like? For Campus Fund, for Richa as the lead of this entire initiative, right? I'd love to understand that, and of course, then parting comments, right? I have a separate question there. I'll come to that in just a bit. But next 2 years, I'd love to understand that.
Sure. No, so we are building Campus Fund on the belief that the future of India Inc. will come in from campuses, and we are going to catch them early and support them through the journey. That's the mission that we are on. And just grateful to see the support that we are getting from all the senior folks in the ecosystem. And that's it. And 2 years down the line, when we'll speak, I'm sure you'll be very proud of the student entrepreneurs that have come out of Campus Fund and what they are doing. So that's the journey. And as I say, Campus Fund is a tribe, right? It's just not about the team that we have, but everyone who's supporting. So you're also part of the tribe now. So welcome to the tribe. And that's what I'll say. Anyone who supports Campus Fund becomes the part of the tribe. That's all.
Thank you, Richa. Last question, very cliched, right? But I think very, very pertinent and very important, right? Now, when you look at a lot of these students, right? They come from variety of backgrounds, right? There is a certain sense of inhibition, right? When they're entering these campuses, right? I mean, this is a new life that they're kind of entering, right? They're not necessarily very sure of themselves. They're still sort of, absorbing what is around them, right? It's a very fragile, yet a very, exciting, point in their lives, right? I think in all of our lives, I think all of us are there, at one point. What is that you would want to, as an advice suggestion, right, to tackle that inhibition? What would that be if you were to give that one advice? I'd love you to sort of end this conversation at that note.
Yes. So, no, that's again, a tough question to answer. But I'd say that, perseverance and resilience are the two things, that these students need to enter this new ecosystem, new colleges when they enter from their homes, where they are cocooned, to universities and trying to explore the world. Resilience and perseverance. These are the two keywords, I'd say. If they have that, they'll sail through. Nothing can stop them. Be at it. Be at it. That's
interesting. Richa, with that, what a lovely session, right? What a lovely session. I think this is one of those sessions that is like really close to my heart, right? Because that, like I said, right? I mean, I through the course of conversation, while we continue to talk, right, in my mind, I'm kind of just trying to assess the impact that this is going to create, right? Sure. And I think more power to you for all the good work that you've been doing, right? More energies, more hands and legs, and I think more money in the bank, right? Because I think that's what you really need. We are in very, very, very exciting economy, right? And I think there's some amazing businesses that are going to get built out of these campuses. Some, of course, are going to be solving for very visible problems. Some are going to be solving for a completely new shift, right? And I think you're in that very, very unique position to understand all of that very early on, right? From the time it possibly gets conceived, incepted, right, at many levels. While there could be many people who can, and like us, right, who are getting older in the play, who could continue to reject some of them, saying that this might not work, whatever. But I think we have to realize that we are getting away from that shift, right? And I think there needs to be a player who really is available, right? I think more capital needs to go in. I think without necessarily being too kind of troubled with what's going to be an outcome, but I think just being available for some of these ideas to come at least up the curve, right? Blossom a little, and then possibly the real visibility starts to happen, right?
Yes.
Richa, we wish you all the very best
Thank you.
for doing incredible job. And I think truly, like there are a lot of people who kind of rave about this fact and kind of claim that they're evangelists of change, right? But I think we need more and more Richas in the game, and more campus funds, right? I think that's really what is required for a large ship like ours, right? Thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time out, and welcome to the tribe again. Thank you so much.
Thanks.